Well, hello minders. Welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Steve Mitchell here, bringing you a new project for the new year, and this is going to be mixed media, like we talked about. This is colored pencil, only it's going to be a colored pencil line and wash, so that does some interesting things. It gives you some interesting options. You can actually use colored pencil on top or underneath, but we'll get into that later. Right now I'm picking a good photo. And I love photos with great light, so I'm going to print out this lady here who's sort of in a period garb working on a quilt using this Kodak matte photo paper. In case you're interested, it makes great photos. So I like a full shot and then a close-up of the face where most of the detail is going to be. Working in the Perfect Sketchbook, the original Perfect Sketchbook, which Etcher sells now, but so this is Fabriano Artistico, and start out as per usual by working out a drawing. And this is the structural work. This is getting all the proportions right, getting all the facial features right, and that part I spend enough time on to make sure it's right. And here I'm just using 0.3, a very fine HB lead to sort of fine-tune that drawing. Now, I am working in some shading. This is not going to be finished. The line is not going to be finished in graphite. So what I'm doing here is sort of a dress rehearsal, if you will. A pre-study study. This is in my sketchbook, so it is kind of a study on its own. But I'm studying here how I want to do the shading with the colored pencil. Colored pencil does not erase very well. So this I'm putting in lightly. I'm not bearing down. This is sort of the line style I'm going for, by the way. I developed this style as an illustration style several years ago, probably 20 years ago. And it just uses graphite as your line work. Very similar to what you would do with pen and ink. That's actually graphite, water-soluble graphite right there. And what's cool about this is you can scan this and bump up the contrast and make your scan look like a pen and ink. So it makes for a great illustration technique. This is another slightly different approach to it, but the same thing. You see how I got all that detail going down the center, and then it fades out to less detail away from the edges. Really works great. I used a rougher paper here to get a little more texture in the line. But still, everything was made with a line and a line style as if I were using pen and ink. You might remember this, it's more recent, and a graphite comparison video that I did here on YouTube. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. But graphite with a very vertical linear style, detailed through the center. Then as it falls off towards the outer edges, it loses detail and it loses shading. Here's yet another approach, what I would call a line and wash using pencil. Now all these are graphite examples, but this can be done with colored pencil. And very limited color here. Just a little splash of color here and there. Most of the toning was carried with the pencil. So that's what I want to accomplish here. And I'm never quite sure how they're going to turn out or how much detail I'm going to balance between the paint and the line. So that's always part of the study and sort of an exercise. So moving on, I'm continuing to experiment with where I want my line. And again, I'm simulating what I'm going to do with the colored pencil. All this will erase quite easily because I'm being very light with the application. But I'm just giving myself something to go by, some contrast to look towards as I add the colored pencil. I'm going to use 3 colors primarily. We've got a burnt sienna, a deep cobalt green, and warm gray 4. I'm pretty happy with the drawing, so I'm just going to lighten it. I'll roll this kneaded eraser over it, just lighten it so I can barely see it. I don't want any of that pencil seen really. I'm going to be replacing all of that with color pencil. But I can see enough of it to remind myself of where I wanted to put what values. So in the warm areas like the face and the shawl and the hands, I'm using this burnt sienna. Now, one thing that I don't like to do, and usually it's not very successful, is I don't go in and outline everything. Now, if you want to do that, if you're going for a look like that, that's fine. But in subtlety, realism, you want to just be very gingerly with your line. And you'll notice I put the line down almost in pieces, in little feathered segments, rather than long extended outlines. And I go for the areas of greatest contrast first, where at some point there will be dark tone or value. So that's where you see me lining. And where it's a very bright highlight, I will go very soft and faint. Here you're seeing it again more in real time again. The time lapse sort of is misrepresents, so I want you to see some of this in real time. So it's a very thoughtful process for me, keeping most of the darker lines to the dark contrast areas. Now let these things evolve, sort of. I have ideas about how I want the technique to work, but I try not to box myself in with an idea. I try to just take the technique thoughts that I have and make them work with the piece and let it evolve as I add the lines. You're going to see me use a little more of that linear style in the hands. I decided to stay very subtle with the face because a more of a heavier hatching line in the face was not going to work. It was going to make the face look sort of dirty and distracting. But in the hands, I think it's going to work okay. And I'll bring out that hatching line in areas of her garment more later, so that it all has sort of a looser style away from the face. And you'll start to see what I'm talking about as I render the garments, the hat. I'm able to use a little more linear technique, a little more expressiveness in the line. Most of her dress was either white or green, so that's why I chose the green pencil. The bonnet was green as well. The shawl was an off-white. There you see me adding some hatching, and I'm showing you again in real time how deliberate this process is. It's not fast, you know. Just because something is loose or expressive doesn't necessarily mean it's done quickly. I think that's a misconception that some artists have with doing things loose and expressive. The face is tight, but these outer areas just get looser and a little more expressive as we get farther away from the face. But just notice adding expression to the line in very deliberate ways. And then I'm going in and adding that line hatching. So it very much is a line and wash. Doing line and wash with colored pencil just gives you the option of adding subtleties that you can't get with a pen. I'll switch to the warm gray 4. By the way, I will add darker tones for these three colors a little later. I decided I wanted some deeper tones, so I ended up getting some pencils that were the same color family but a little deeper. On that shawl, you can see I'm just hinting at those knitted textures. Just a hint. I definitely don't want to overwhelm with detail. And more of the line hatching. I like doing vertical line. It's just a style that I enjoy. There's something about it, I think, that kind of takes you out of the contour, or being too much of a slave to the contour, and just rendering tone in hatching. Something very unique and satisfying about it to me. to render almost all of the linear hatching vertically. Some of it I do diagonally, but most of it is vertical. And now I'm starting to build in that deeper value, the little pops in her sleeve. This picture had some nice little areas of dark green that just I thought were really nice in terms of design of where the deep values would end up. On those sleeves, around the collar, the whole bonnet itself. But again, remember the pace that you saw me working at when it was in real time. And that's how deliberately I'm going through all of this. So the time lapse aside, this is not a fast, quick process. Alright, so time to paint. I'm going to use my Renaissance palette. These are Renaissance tubes, and this is a Polish paint in case you didn't see my review of this paint. There's only one lady in the US, I think, selling it on Etsy. It's a really nice paint. It's a honey-based paint like M-Gram, so I love it already for that. These are softer colors, I think, than M-Gram. And I use this palette because it's perfect for flesh tones. It's got just the right selection of colors, I think. It has a good variety, and I like it for flesh tones. This subject was sitting in a bright, sunny spot, so I'm going to just paint through with a pale, sort of yellowish wash. I think mostly Indian yellow, probably a little scarlet. All of this will dry very pale. But then I can go over some of those areas with the green, and they'll just be nice and warm. All the warm highlights now in the face will be warm. And while it's still wet, it has started to dry a little, but I did want to go ahead and add some green just for some soft blending. Most of the green, though, will be added over dry. This technique is really fun because you can almost stop anywhere. Once you get the line done, you can almost stop anywhere. And you get different character. You know, just a lightly washed line drawing or a more detailed painting over a line drawing. I decided to go for the latter, a more detailed, highly rendered painting, but only in the face. Most of the shawl and sleeves and all are going to stay loose and very suggestive. And most of that is done. I'll go back and add some deeper values, just deepen some of those darkest values, but most of that's done. Most of the time is going to be spent on the face, and I will go back and add more paint to the hands. So in this respect, I'm not painting loose. You can paint loose and expressively on a face, but you got to be careful doing that. Really, your face needs to be bigger because if the technique gets too coarse, some of the expressiveness can actually kind of bugger up your expression or your likeness if you're going for a likeness. So again, that's why I decided to keep this very, very tight. And it's a nice focal point to do that. This is where the values are very important. You got to be careful with values and all the little ridges and wrinkles. And this lady was probably in her 70s. She had a very character-lined face, and if you're too overly aggressive or paint those lines too boldly, you know, you'll mess up sort of the whole structure of the face. And I mostly wanted a convincing, interesting face. So I'm just applying glazes. Glazes, just light layers over dry. very important to protect your whites. I am painting transparently here. I'm not planning on doing much colored pencil on top of this, mostly in the linear areas. So the facial part is very traditional, transparent. Painting around those values, those highlights, and preserving the highlights, the white of the paper. That's where all the impact is. It was one of the reasons I chose this photo, because of the drama of the light in the face. I think I've mentioned it before in other videos. My favorite subject is light. I can paint just about anything. Landscapes, portraits, flowers, animals. It doesn't matter. I enjoy them all, but what I enjoy most is interesting, dynamic, inspiring light. And this was another case of that. I'm popping in the background here. Purples and browns. I have trouble remembering the names of the paints on this palette. I'll list the colors in the description. Everything is a pretty complex mix. I don't paint with a color. So if you say, what color is that? Well, it's several. This is mineral violet, I believe, and some Polish brown, and some ultramarine blue, I believe, and a little bit of red ochre up there, as I recall. When I paint with my M. palette, I can pretty much name all the colors right off the top of my head, but some of these other palettes I don't use as often. I have to be looking at the palette swatches. This dark background was in the photo, or the values were in the photo, and I thought it was just a great opportunity to make those facial features and the highlights in the face really pop. I think we've got pretty much all of the paint down. Now it's just deepening the values till they're satisfactorily dark. Now I'm going on top, and I want to make some of these expressive, scribbly, sort of sketchy lines a little more evident. I want the technique in the line in these looser areas to show more in places, so I'm just strengthening that. And again, notice it's not quick. It's not like scribble, scribble, quick sketch, sketch, sketch. These are deliberate lines, and I just find that I do better with expressive lines that way. And I wanted to add some highlights to the hair, and some little wispy edges. It looked a little bit kind of blocky. So this is the cream or ivory colored polychromos. Now, polychromos's light colors are not the most opaque, so I pulled out this white Prismacolor. And yeah, it's okay to mix wax-based colored pencil with oil-based. It works fine. But Prismacolor's white is a little more opaque than the light colors on polychromos. And you can go back over the white if you want to warm it up with that ivory, which I did do. And here we're done. This is the finished piece. And as a sketchbook entry, I'm pretty happy with that. Thanks everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you patrons for your support. And we'll see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.